Today, I will tell you the day my son's bride called me no one at their wedding, in front of 150 guests. The laughter that followed? It echoed like a verdict. Her name was Juliana Reed, daughter of old money, or so everyone thought. And me? I'm Henry Whitmore, a widower, 68, and founder of a recovery foundation built from the ashes of my own rock bottom. 12 years sober, 12 years rebuilding every piece of my name, one that, apparently, meant nothing to her. As I stood there, holding my glass of water, she smirked and said, "Oh, him? He's no one. Just my fiancé's father. Don't worry about it." The guests laughed. My son, Daniel, didn't say a word. They had no idea what they were standing on. That $3 million mansion behind them, the centerpiece of their fairy tale, was built on land my late wife Margaret left in my name. They thought they owned the world, but they were standing on mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I've already buried bigger egos than yours," because I knew what was coming. What they didn't know, what none of those laughing faces could have imagined, was that this wedding would end with their perfect illusion collapsing under the weight of one old man's quiet truth. "They called me no one," I said to myself that night, "but the land remembers every name written in its soil, and soon everyone else would too." The laughter lingered long after the music stopped. It was the kind of sound that doesn't fade. It stains. I remember every chuckle, every whisper of amusement that swept through the wedding hall like wind over broken glass. I stood there, still holding my glass of water, the condensation running down my fingers like a reminder to stay cold. Daniel avoided my eyes. Juliana basked in the moment, her diamonds flashing under the lights, her voice honeyed with cruelty. She was proud of the humiliation she'd crafted, proud that she could reduce me to a punchline. The pianist played louder, as if trying to drown out the tension, but it was too late. The air had already turned thick, filled with judgment disguised as charm. People leaned in, curious to see how I'd react. I gave them nothing, just a nod, just that same tired smile. Inside, though, I felt something stir. Not anger, not shame, but memory. I'd been laughed at before, by creditors, by doctors, by people who said I'd never rebuild. They were wrong. So was she. They thought laughter buried the truth, but I'd learned something in recovery. Silence can outlast ridicule. That night their laughter echoed. It still does. But soon it would echo differently, through shame they'd never forget. Behind them, the mansion glowed like a stage set, every chandelier and marble stair gleaming under the rented lights. People saw beauty. I saw debt, the kind of beauty that hides rot beneath polish. They called it the Reed Estate, a name stitched from vanity and loans. I knew that land long before they paved it with imported stone and false stories. My late wife Margaret used to walk those same cliffs barefoot, her laughter chasing gulls through the wind. She wanted to build a home there, not a monument. But after she passed, I let the land rest. It carried too much memory. Juliana's family bought it years later, or so they claimed. Their contract never crossed my desk because it couldn't. The trust still carried Margaret's signature, untouched and silent, waiting. I remember watching guests pose for photos on the grand staircase that night, each flash reflecting off windows overlooking the ocean. They thought the sea made them powerful. They didn't realize it made them small. That mansion wasn't theirs, not really. It belonged to time, to Margaret, to me. I let them have their illusion. Let them toast under borrowed chandeliers, because someday soon that house would tell the truth better than I ever could. After she called me no one, I smiled. Not the polite kind you give strangers, but the kind that says you've already decided something no one else knows. That smile was armor. It steadied my hands, cooled my heart, turned humiliation into quiet calculation. Juliana noticed. Her laughter faltered, just for a second, the way a flame hesitates before wind takes it. I lifted my glass of water again, not to toast her, but to mark the moment. Every recovery meeting I'd ever led had taught me one thing: control doesn't live in noise, it lives in breath. I took one and waited. Around me, the guests returned to their chatter, relieved the scene hadn't turned ugly. Daniel laughed nervously, pretending everything was fine. But I caught his glance. He knew that smile. It was the same one I wore when I walked into court 12 years ago to reclaim my life. I said nothing that night, but inside, a clock began to tick. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning balance. She wanted spectacle. I preferred precision. My smile promised both. Later that night, long after the music faded, I drove out to the coast. The mansion's lights glimmered behind me like a distant wound. I parked near the old fence line, where wild grass still bent the way it did when Margaret and I first saw this place. The wind carried salt and memory. I could almost hear her voice telling me not to let pride make me cruel. I wasn't thinking about revenge then, only justice. I stepped onto the sand and looked toward the cliffs where the foundation of their mansion now sat. Beneath all that marble and money, the earth still breathed her name. It remembered the laughter we shared, the promise she made before she died. Never let anyone make you small again. The waves rolled in, erasing footprints as quickly as they formed. That's how dignity works. It doesn't stay loud, it stays true. I placed my hand on the cold wooden post of the fence and whispered her name. The night didn't answer, but the land did, in its own quiet way. I knew then what I had to do. The ground beneath their perfect lives already belonged to me. It just hadn't spoken yet. 6 months before the wedding, Daniel invited me to dinner. "You'll love her, Dad," he said. "She's refined, elegant." I brought a bottle of sparkling cider, the kind we used to open on New Year's after I got sober. Their apartment sat high above downtown, full of glass and light. When the door opened, Juliana stood there in silk and perfume, her smile polite, her eyes calculating. "Oh," she said, glancing behind me as if expecting someone else. "Daniel didn't mention you were coming tonight." I smiled, extending my hand. Her grip was brief, her fingers cold. Daniel rushed over, nervous, pulling out a chair at the table. The food looked perfect, every dish arranged like a photograph, but the air carried a stiffness that had nothing to do with temperature. We talked about the weather, her new job, the view from their balcony. Every word balanced on formality, fragile as glass. I could feel her measuring me, my tone, my posture, my restraint. She wasn't cruel yet, just distant, curious in the way people are when they suspect they're above you. I told myself to give her time, but something in her smile said she'd already drawn her conclusions. I brought flowers that night, Margaret's favorite lilies, simple, white, and fragrant. I held them out as I stepped through the door, expecting the polite thank you people offer even when they don't mean it. Juliana looked at the bouquet like it was something that might stain her dress. "Oh," she said softly, "you didn't have to." She didn't take them. The pause that followed stretched too long. Daniel noticed, his smile faltering. "Let's put them in a vase, honey," he said. She waved him off, turning back toward the kitchen. I ended up setting the flowers on the counter myself, the paper rustling louder than the conversation that followed. They looked out of place, too honest for that sleek apartment, too warm for that cold room. I watched her pour wine she didn't offer me, and I realized kindness wasn't something she forgot. It was something she rationed. Those lilies wilted in the corner before the night was over. When I left, I almost took them with me, but I didn't. Let them die there, I thought. Every house shows its truth eventually. Dinner went smoothly enough until she brought up my work. "Daniel tells me you run some kind of recovery center?" Her tone lingered on "some kind," as if the words had an odor. I nodded. "Whitmore Recovery Foundation," I said. "We help people start over." She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "That's admirable, considering your situation." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Daniel shifted in his seat. "She means your background," he said quickly, trying to smooth it over. I smiled instead. "You mean my drinking?" I replied. "Yes, that was my situation. Now it's my story." She looked momentarily unsure, then laughed, the kind of laugh people give when they think they've won something. I didn't correct her. I'd learned long ago that people reveal themselves most when they believe you're beneath them. Her words landed, not like a wound, but like a reminder. How easily dignity offends the shallow. I finished my meal quietly, each bite slow, each word chosen. Some people mistake calm for weakness. I let her make that mistake. She noticed everything about me that night, but not in the way kindness notices. Her gaze lingered on my jacket, the old tweed one I'd worn for years. "You're comfortable dressing casually, I see," she said, pouring herself more wine. "Always," I answered. "Comfort's underrated." Daniel chuckled nervously, trying to change the subject. But Juliana's smirk held steady, amused by her own subtlety. I'd been around people like her before, those who hide contempt behind charm, the kind who use politeness as a scalpel. I looked down at my sleeves, the faint wear near the cuffs, the threadbare edge I'd never bothered to replace. My clothes were clean, pressed, honest. Hers were pristine but soulless. I didn't envy her polish. I pitied her emptiness. The conversation drifted to wedding plans, designer venues, guest lists. She never once said my name, just your father or him. Every time she did, Daniel's eyes dimmed a little more. I stayed quiet, listening, counting the spaces where respect should have been. When I left that night, the city felt louder than usual. Traffic, laughter, the hum of lights. They all carried a distance I hadn't felt in years. I walked 2 blocks before I realized I was still holding the empty bouquet wrapper. I stopped under a street lamp and looked at it, crushed between my fingers. I'd faced courts, creditors, and the long, grinding silence of recovery, but nothing bruised like polite disdain. Shame doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles across a dinner table and calls itself class. I told myself Daniel was just blind in love, that he'd see the cracks soon enough. But as I watched their balcony lights from below, I understood something deeper. My son didn't just love her. He wanted to become her world, and in that world, I didn't fit. I walked home with the city wind in my hair, the wrapper fluttering in my hand like a small, defeated flag. By the time I reached my car, I had already decided. Next time, I'd bring no gifts, no flowers, no hope for approval. Just patience. Juliana spoke of her parents as if they were royalty. "They're flying in from California," she said once, her tone wrapped in importance. "They don't travel much unless it's truly special." She never showed pictures, only stories, lavish dinners in Napa, summers in Monaco, a father who collected art, a mother who chaired charities. Every detail sounded rehearsed, polished, untouchable. When I asked Daniel what they did, he hesitated. "They're private people," he said. "Old money." That phrase again, heavy and hollow. I'd met real old money in my business days. It never needed to announce itself. I searched their names once. Reed, California. Nothing. No articles, no board memberships, no foundation grants. Just air. The kind that fills space without substance. I wondered if Daniel noticed, or if love had made him conveniently blind. People like Juliana build their worth from smoke and mirrors, and they need believers more than witnesses. She'd found one in my son. I told myself not to interfere, not yet, but every lie wears a reflection eventually. I just had to wait until hers cracked. There were inconsistencies everywhere. One evening, Daniel mentioned Juliana's father had served in the Navy. The next week, she said he was a venture capitalist. Her accent shifted when she drank. California polished one moment, East Coast clipped the next. She called herself cultured, but couldn't pronounce the names of half the wines she flaunted. It was small, almost funny, until I realized how easily Daniel accepted each version. He wanted to believe her so badly that he edited reality for her. "She's been through a lot," he'd say, whenever her story changed. "She just wants people to like her." I'd nod, pretending to agree, though deep down, I knew it wasn't about being liked. It was about being believed. Some people survive by lying so long they forget what truth feels like. I'd seen that kind of denial in addicts, masking wounds with words. Juliana's addiction wasn't to alcohol, it was to image. And like all addictions, It demanded enablers. My son had become her supply. I used to think silence meant peace. It doesn't. It means distance dressed in politeness. The calls had stopped completely by spring. No messages, no excuses, just absence. I'd walk past the phone each morning, waiting for something that never came. His name still sat at the top of my favorites list, untouched, like a shrine to a bond that used to breathe. One night I dialed anyway, knowing he wouldn't answer. The ringtone felt longer than usual, each tone a measure of loss. Finally, the automated voice said what no parent ever wants to hear. "The number you have reached is unavailable." I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was realization. He wasn't just busy. He was gone, swallowed by someone else's world, a world that needed him to forget where he came from. I thought about Margaret and the promise I made at her bedside, to keep Daniel grounded, to keep him safe from vanity and false pride. I hadn't broken it. I'd just been outplayed. A week later, Daniel finally called. His voice sounded strained, half guilt, half exhaustion. "Dad, you know Juliana's trying. You make her nervous." I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. "Why would kindness make anyone nervous?" I asked. Silence. Then he sighed. "She just feels judged, like you look down on her." That stung, because it was backward. "Daniel," I said softly, "judgment doesn't always come from above. Sometimes it comes from people afraid to look up." He didn't answer. I heard murmuring in the background. Her voice. "I have to go," he said quickly. The line went dead. I sat there for a while, phone heavy in my hand. Shame is strange. It doesn't live in truth. It lives in perception. Juliana had turned my past into a mirror and handed it to my son. He saw my reflection through her distortions. For the first time in years, I felt something close to the shame I thought I'd buried. But this time, it wasn't mine to carry. I called Jerry the next morning, my old sponsor, the man who'd dragged me through the worst nights of my recovery. "Tough week?" he asked before I said a word. "The toughest," I admitted, my son slipping away. Jerry's laugh was soft, knowing. "People love to rewrite stories, Henry, but your truth doesn't need their approval." "Feels like I'm losing him," I said. "No," he replied. "You're watching him get tested, same as you once did." I could almost hear the clink of his coffee mug through the phone. "Remember what I told you back then?" "That silence isn't surrender." "Exactly," he said. "It's space. Let it work." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle. Recovery had taught me to face storms without shouting at the rain. This was no different. Jerry always knew how to remind me that dignity isn't noise, it's persistence. We said our goodbyes, and before hanging up, he added quietly, "Don't forget who you are just because they do." A week before the wedding, Daniel called again, his voice brighter than usual. "Dad, Juliana wants you at the rehearsal dinner. She says she wants to make peace." I could hear her coaching him in the background, the soft murmur of a rehearsed kindness. "Tell him it's important." He repeated the words exactly. "Of course," I said. "Where is it?" "Magnolia Country Club," he answered. "She booked the ballroom." The name alone told me everything I needed to know. Where status replaces sincerity and appearances cost extra. I agreed anyway. "I'll be there," I said, calm, steady. "That'll mean a lot to her," he replied. But his tone sounded relieved, not grateful. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet and thought about Margaret. She would have gone, not out of pride, but out of faith in truth. So would I. Only this time, truth was walking in with evidence. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I parked at the far edge of the lot and watched through the windshield. The country club shimmered with chandeliers and laughter spilling into the night. Guests stepped out of cars polished brighter than their morals. I stayed there a moment, adjusting my tie, watching people in suits and sequins glide through the glass doors like actors entering a stage. Inside, they'd toast to love and legacy, to a family that didn't exist. I wanted to see the illusion for myself. When I finally stepped out, the wind carried the faintest trace of the ocean for miles away, the same wind that once carried Margaret's hair across her face. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the light. Each step sounded deliberate, grounding. The valet boy nodded, assuming I belonged there. For once, I let him believe it. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and wealth. I spotted Juliana immediately. Sparkling gown, perfect posture, greeting guests with the confidence of someone who'd practiced charm in front of a mirror. Beside her stood two older people, all smiles and sophistication. "Dad," Daniel said, guiding me closer. "Meet Juliana's parents." Her father extended a hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Whitmore." The voice was too smooth, the timing rehearsed. I asked casually, "Which part of California did you say you're from?" The man hesitated just long enough. "San Diego," he said. The woman smiled tightly, eyes darting toward Juliana. "We just moved north," she added. I caught the flicker of panic between them. A good lie always trembles before it breaks. "Beautiful area," I said simply. Juliana's laugh cut through the silence, brittle and bright. "Shall we sit?" she said quickly. I smiled back. "After you." The actors had arrived. They just didn't know the script had changed. After the dinner, I stopped at a coffee shop on the way home. Jerry was there, same booth, same worn jacket, as if he'd been waiting. "You look like a man who saw too much truth in one night," he said. I chuckled softly. "Maybe." He leaned forward. "You remember what I told you about storms?" I nodded. "Never chase them. Let them reveal what they destroy." He smiled. "Good. Then let this one blow through." I told him about the fake family, the polished lies, the polite humiliation. He listened, never interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The people who fake power always fear silence. You don't need to raise your voice, Henry. Just let your quiet do the talking." I left a few minutes later, the coffee still warm in my hand. Outside, the sky was clear, stars bright enough to feel close. I thought about what Jerry said. The storm was already coming, and all I had to do was stand still. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, my phone buzzed before sunrise. It was Dr. Sarah Whitmore, my cousin and a genealogist who'd helped me with family archives years ago. "Henry, I've been doing that favor you asked about," she said. Her voice carried the same tone she used when bad news was coming. "There are no official records of any Reed lineage in California before 2018. No property, no tax filings, no marriage certificates, nothing. It's like they appeared from thin air." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the framed photo of Margaret. "So they just made it all up," I said. "Looks like it," Sarah replied. "And if their names are aliases, they might be hiding more than just pride." My mind replayed the hesitation in that man's voice last night, the flicker of panic. "Send me everything you find," I told her. "Discreetly." She paused. "Henry, be careful. People like that build walls out of lies. They crumble fast, but they fall hard." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll stand back when they do." By noon, Elise and I sat in her office surrounded by folders and open laptops. The sound of the copier hummed like a heartbeat in the background. "Their documents are too clean," she said, scrolling through property filings. "New LLCs, same handwriting, different signatures." She flipped the papers toward me. "This isn't just vanity, it's organized deceit." I nodded. They needed a name strong enough to fool old money circles. The Reeds gave them that. She leaned back. "I'll trace the funding trail. Fake wealth always leaves a real receipt." I admired her precision. That's what made her indispensable. She chased truth the way others chased applause. "And Henry," she added, "don't show your hand too soon. Let them keep thinking you're harmless." I smiled. "I'm good at that." When she laughed, it was soft but certain. We both knew where this was heading. Every illusion, no matter how polished, leaves fingerprints. We were about to find theirs. 2 days later, Elise called me back into her office. "You're going to want to see this," she said, sliding a contract across the table. It was from a small talent agency in Los Angeles, Reed Entertainment. The signatures matched the so-called parents from the rehearsal dinner. "They're actors," she confirmed. "Paid $1,500 a day. Juliana hired them under a shell company." I studied the pages, the ink still crisp, the absurdity sharp. "She bought a family," I said quietly. "Rented one," Elise corrected. I sat back, breathing slow. It was both ridiculous and cruel, creating an entire lineage to sell a dream of status. "What kind of person does that?" I asked. Elise shrugged. "Someone terrified of being ordinary." I stared out the window at the city skyline. All those buildings, all those facades, perfect metaphors. "We'll keep digging," she said. "Every performance ends eventually." "Yes," I murmured, "and some end with applause they never wanted." The deeper we looked, the more absurd it became. Birth records filed under names that didn't exist. Ancestry listings created a month before their engagement party. Even the photos on Juliana's social media were composites, faces cropped and edited into lavish scenes. Elise called it digital taxidermy, the art of dressing up dead identities. "This one," she pointed, "claims to be her grandmother. The woman died in 1992. I shook my head, half in disbelief, half in pity. "She didn't just lie about who she was," I said. "She erased whoever she might have been." Elise nodded. "People like her don't want roots, they want mirrors." I opened one of the forged documents and saw Margaret's maiden name listed under affiliations. That was when it hit me. "She didn't just build lies," I said slowly. "She built them over my wife's legacy." The air in the room thickened. Elise looked up. "Then this isn't just fraud, Henry. It's theft." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "And I plan to take back every inch. Every deception has a design." Juliana's was immaculate. Photo spreads of fundraisers that never happened, press mentions linked to ghost magazines, and a rented estate for engagement photos staged to look inherited. Her entire persona was a performance stitched together from borrowed luxury. Daniel had fallen for the costume, not the person. I drove past the mansion that night, its white columns glowing under the security lights. From a distance, it looked eternal, flawless. But even marble can crack when the foundation beneath it is stolen. I parked by the roadside, engine off, and watched shadows move across the curtains. Somewhere inside, Juliana probably thought she'd won. The charity wife, the perfect hostess, the woman who tamed an empire. She didn't know empires crumble quietly, one truth at a time. I rolled down the window, let the ocean breeze fill the car, and whispered into the night, "You're living on borrowed ground, Juliana, and debts always come due." By the time dawn broke, Sarah had sent me a dozen scanned pages, each one a nail in Juliana's illusion. "Henry," her voicemail said, "there's one more thing. The land under that mansion? It's registered under Whitmore Coastal Holdings, Margaret's trust. The property was never legally transferred." I sat at my desk, light from the monitor flickering against my hands. The document bore my wife's signature, dated 15 years ago. It meant one simple truth. Juliana's dream home stood on soil that wasn't hers. "They built their empire on her grave," I whispered. I thought about Daniel, his proud smile the last time he'd spoken about the house. He'd called it a symbol of legacy. He was right, but not hers. Margaret had left that land for family, not fraud. I picked up the golden key from my drawer, feeling its weight again. Sarah texted a final line. "You have every legal right to it." I smiled faintly. Legal right, yes, but this wasn't about law anymore. It was about restoring something older than justice, dignity. The morning came wrapped in sunlight and irony. Birds sang over a property that didn't belong to its owners. I stood outside the coastal estate in a gray suit, the same one I'd worn at Margaret's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. Guests arrived in waves of perfume and chatter. Cameras flashed, cars lined up, and the world believed it was witnessing a union of prestige. But I saw scaffolding, emotional, moral, and literal, barely holding up a dream. Elise had arrived early, quiet as ever, clipboard in hand. "Everything ready?" she asked. "Everything," I said. The projector, the slides, the contracts, they were all queued up in Ethan's laptop. It would take just one click to turn illusion into evidence. "You sure about this?" Elise asked softly. "I've never been surer," I replied. She nodded, eyes steady. "Then let's make truth the guest of honor." The wind picked up from the ocean, rustling through the floral archway. Somewhere above the waves, Margaret's voice whispered, "Stand tall." From the outside, the mansion looked flawless. White pillars, manicured gardens, marble fountains catching the morning sun. Inside, however, everything reeked of performance. Staff hurried, photographers barked orders, and Juliana glided through the chaos like a director on her final act. "Make sure the piano faces the balcony," she said sharply. "It photographs better." Her voice dripped with command. I watched from a corner, unnoticed. Daniel looked anxious, fiddling with his cufflinks. "Big day," I said softly as I approached. He smiled nervously. "Yeah, Dad. Just a lot to handle." I wanted to tell him the weight he carried wasn't love. It was illusion. But timing mattered. "You'll be fine," I said instead. Juliana turned then, eyes locking on me for a fraction of a second. There was triumph in her look, the same kind of triumph people wear before a fall. I simply nodded, calm as ever. Around us, decorators placed centerpieces worth thousands on tables sitting over land worth millions. When the seating chart appeared, I found my name near the bottom corner, table 12, next to the kitchen doors. I smiled, almost amused. It was exactly where she wanted me, close enough to witness, far enough to be forgotten. A waiter brushed past carrying champagne. I caught the faint scent of citrus and deceit. Elise stood near the back, giving me a brief nod. "We're set," she mouthed. Across the room, Juliana raised her glass for a rehearsal toast, her laughter carrying over the chatter. "Family," she said, "the most precious currency." The crowd cheered. I glanced around at those polished faces, every smile paid for with borrowed credibility. The servers lined up behind me, one door swing away from the clatter of dishes and the smell of oil. "Table 12, I murmured, "where family meets the staff." I looked toward Daniel. He was laughing, unaware. It didn't matter. By nightfall, every table in this hall would know exactly where they stood. Guests poured in like waves. Business partners, influencers, distant relatives, all dressed to match the fantasy. They posed in front of the mansion's grand staircase, unaware they were standing on contested ground. "Beautiful place," one woman said to me. "Juliana's parents spared no expense." I smiled politely. "No expense at all," I replied, the truth slipping through unnoticed. Daniel greeted guests beside his bride, his pride both genuine and fragile. They believed every detail: the rented Rolls-Royce, the custom ice sculpture, the pianist flown in from Miami. No one questioned how quickly wealth had appeared. No one ever does when the lighting's perfect. Elise moved quietly through the crowd, confirming everything was in place. Ethan stood by the sound booth, remote in pocket. I felt no anger, only patience. Deception was about to meet its expiration date. Around me, glasses clinked, laughter rose, and the illusion sparkled one last time before the truth came to collect. The ceremony began under a sky so blue it looked painted. Strings played softly, while guests fanned themselves with folded programs. I sat near the back, hands folded, heart steady. Every story has its rhythm, and mine was about to reach the pause before the crescendo. Elise caught my eye from across the aisle, a small nod reminding me everything was ready. The evidence sat in a folder beneath her chair, the contracts, the deeds, the receipts. Truth waited quietly, like an old friend patient enough to arrive on time. Juliana glided down the aisle in lace and arrogance, smiling for the cameras as if heaven itself were applauding. Daniel's face was pale, unsure. When the officiant asked for vows, the wind shifted, carrying salt from the ocean through the open doors. I took a slow breath and whispered to myself, "Not yet." Because patience is its own kind of power. The world mistook my silence for surrender, but I was merely waiting for the applause to stop. The reception glittered with crystal, silver, and deceit. Waiters poured champagne, photographers flashed, and laughter filled the hall like perfume. Pleasant, overwhelming, empty. When it came time for the speeches, Juliana's father, an actor still in costume, stood and offered a toast about family legacy. "To those who built something from nothing," he said, unaware how close he was to the truth. Guests clapped politely. Then Juliana rose, her glass catching the chandelier's light. "To new beginnings," she said, turning her gaze toward me, "and to knowing your place." A ripple of laughter followed, soft at first, then spreading. I kept my posture straight, my face calm. Daniel stared at the tablecloth, pretending not to hear. Elise's hand tightened on the folder beside her. My reflection stared back at me from the silver platter in front of me, calm, still, unbroken. Let them laugh, I thought. They'll need the breath for what comes next. Juliana took the microphone, her voice dripping with charm. "Family," she said, pausing for effect, "isn't about where you come from. It's about what you make of yourself." The guests nodded, enchanted. "Some people," she continued, "cling to the past as if it gives them value. But we're here to celebrate progress, not pity." The room laughed again. I felt my jaw tighten, not from anger, but restraint. Her words weren't meant to wound. They were meant to erase. Behind her, the projector screen hung like a curtain waiting to fall. Elise's eyes met mine. She knew the moment was near. "To legacy," Juliana finished, raising her glass. "To rising above where we started." Her toast was a performance, every syllable rehearsed. The irony of her statement was perfect. I lifted my glass of water once more and nodded politely. My patience had always been mistaken for weakness. Tonight, it would be remembered as strategy. Daniel stood then, ready to speak, but Juliana cut him off. "Oh, him?" she said, pointing toward me with a careless laugh. "He's no one, just my fiancé's father." The words landed harder the second time, sharper for being familiar. A fork clattered against a plate, the sound slicing through the laughter. My son froze, lips parting, but no sound escaping. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The air itself seemed to pause, waiting for a reaction that never came. Juliana smirked, thinking she'd won. Around her, people looked away, uncomfortable but compliant. I let the silence hang, long enough for the moment to turn heavy. Then, slowly, I smiled. Not from forgiveness, but from clarity. Every humiliation builds its own echo, and hers was about to return louder than she could imagine. I whispered to myself, "No one? The land remembers differently." Daniel's silence was worse than her insult. It filled the room, thick and suffocating. He looked down, fingers gripping his napkin, torn between love and loyalty. I saw myself in that hesitation, the boy who once avoided confrontation to keep the peace, the same weakness I'd spent years unlearning. Juliana slipped her hand through his arm, smiling at the guests as if nothing had happened. Her charm was a blade, polished and bloodless. Elise glanced my way, her expression calm but firm. Everything inside me wanted to stand, to speak, to defend the dignity that once cost me everything. But I stayed seated, because revenge spoken is fleeting, revenge revealed is permanent. Daniel would have to learn the truth the same way everyone else would, through evidence, not emotion. I took one final sip of water, the taste clean and cold. "It's all right, son," I thought. "Silence taught me too. But tonight, you'll finally hear what silence sounds like when it speaks." The laughter faded, replaced by clinking glasses and murmured gossip. I sat still, breathing evenly, feeling the room pulse with false comfort. The music resumed, soft jazz masking tension. Elise moved toward the sound booth, quiet and precise. Ethan stood beside her, hand hovering near the remote. Our timing had to be perfect. The lights dimmed slightly as dessert was served, candles flickering in crystal holders. Juliana leaned close to Daniel, whispering something that made him smile nervously. The entire scene looked like a painting, flawless until you looked too long. I felt the weight of Margaret's golden key in my pocket, pressing against the fabric like a heartbeat. It wasn't anger I carried now, but purpose. Let them finish their last course, I thought. Then truth will be served. The hum of conversation grew faint, the air shifting as if the room itself sensed what was coming. I turned my glass slowly in my hand, watching reflections of chandeliers shiver across the water's surface. Calm was my weapon. Ethan's subtle nod was my cue. The first image appeared on the projector screen, an aerial photo of the estate, labeled Property of Whitmore Coastal Holdings. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Juliana blinked, frozen smile faltering. "What is this?" someone asked. Elise's voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, the property you're standing on was never sold to the Reed family. Legal documents show it still belongs to the Whitmore Trust." Gasps followed, like wind breaking glass. I stood, calm as a stone. The next slide revealed signatures. Margaret's name beside mine, the ink clean and final. My voice carried across the silence. This land was left by my wife, Margaret Whitmore. Every brick above it was built on her legacy. Cameras that once flashed for vanity now recorded truth. Juliana's face paled. Daniel looked between us, his certainty collapsing. The room had gone from celebration to courtroom in seconds. Elise handed me the folder, aged paper, embossed seal, Margaret's familiar signature looping like a wave. I opened it slowly so everyone could see. "This," I said, "is the original deed. Filed in 1998, untouched, still active." The murmurs turned into shock. Guests craned their necks, some standing, others whispering names they barely remembered. "This can't be real," Juliana's fake father muttered, his voice trembling. Elise stepped forward. "The Reeds' claim to ownership was fabricated. The mansion was built on land illegally obtained under a false company name." I placed the deed on the table beside the microphone. "You built your fantasy on another woman's memory," I said softly. Juliana's hand shook. "You're lying," she screamed, voice breaking. "Am I?" I asked, turning the folder toward her. "You'll find your signature missing where honesty should have been." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the silence itself became proof. Truth doesn't need applause. It stands perfectly still. Juliana rushed to the stage, tears cutting through her makeup. "This is an ambush," she cried. "He's making this up." I didn't move. "Then show them your proof," I said evenly. Elise handed her a duplicate copy of the contract. Juliana's eyes darted across the pages, searching for a name that wasn't there. "Margaret Whitmore," she read aloud, voice trembling. This can't—" "It can," I said quietly. "And it does." Daniel stepped closer, whispering, "Jules, what is he talking about?" She turned to him, desperate. "They're lying. Please, believe me." But belief falters under evidence. The guests leaned forward, hungry for truth now that pretense had lost its flavor. I stepped toward the microphone. "You said I was no one," I told her, "but the ground beneath your feet has my name carved in it." The chandelier light shimmered across her tears. She dropped the papers. And in that small sound of paper hitting the floor, her empire fell. The room erupted, not in applause, but disbelief. Conversations collided, whispers turning to gasps. "She faked it?" one woman murmured. "All of it?" Another guest shook his head. "Actors, imagine." Phones lifted, flashes returned, but now they captured scandal, not glamour. Juliana stumbled backward, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Daniel stood motionless, his world rearranging itself one truth at a time. The fake parents slipped quietly toward the exit, their performance finally over. Elise collected the remaining documents, efficient even in chaos. I stayed still, watching the collapse with calm clarity. No satisfaction, just quiet justice. "This is impossible," someone said. I looked toward the ocean through the tall windows, its waves glimmering under moonlight. "Not impossible," I said softly, "just overdue. Every lie eventually meets the moment it can't perform anymore. Tonight, that moment came dressed in crystal and gold. And as the crowd murmured, I felt the earth beneath the mansion exhale, as if relieved to be known again." Juliana sank to her knees, her veil slipping off her head like a curtain drawn on the final act. "You ruined me!" she shouted, voice echoing across the ballroom. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the scattered papers, smudging her own tears across Margaret's name. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she cried. I said nothing. The weight of her collapse filled the room heavier than any scream could. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. "Jules," he whispered, but she turned away. "You don't understand. I did it for us." Her voice broke, pleading for sympathy in a hall that had turned cold. Every guest watched in uneasy silence, unsure if pity or disgust was the proper response. I could feel Elise beside me, her steady presence anchoring the storm. I almost pitied Juliana then, not for what she lost, but for what she never truly had. Lies may buy admiration, but they can't rent peace. And peace was something she'd never known. At the back of the ballroom, the two hired parents exchanged a panicked glance. The woman clutched her purse. The man muttered, "We're done." Without waiting for permission, they slipped toward the side door, their polished smiles dissolving into fear. A waiter noticed them rushing past and whispered, "Aren't those her parents?" The murmur spread. Phones turned, capturing the moment the fantasy physically walked out of the room. Juliana looked up just in time to see her fabricated family vanish into the night. "No, don't leave!" she screamed. But they didn't turn back. Her voice cracked against the marble walls, echoing with nothing to answer it. Security hesitated, waiting for a signal. Elise simply nodded, and the guards followed protocol, escorting the pair out quietly, professionally, like stagehands removing props no longer needed. The door closed behind them with a hollow thud. For the first time all night, the room was honest. At the back of the ballroom, the two hired parents exchanged a panicked glance. The woman clutched her purse. The man muttered, "We're done." Without waiting for permission, they slipped toward the side door, their polished smiles dissolving into fear. A waiter noticed them rushing past and whispered, "Aren't those her parents?" The murmur spread. Phones turned, capturing the moment the fantasy physically walked out of the room. Juliana looked up just in time to see her fabricated family vanish into the night. "No, don't leave!" she screamed, but they didn't turn back. Her voice cracked against the marble walls, echoing with nothing to answer it. Security hesitated, waiting for a signal. Elise simply nodded, and the guards followed protocol, escorting the pair out quietly, professionally, like stagehands removing props no longer needed. The door closed behind them with a hollow thud. For the first time all night, the room was honest. Ethan dimmed the projector. Elise stepped forward, holding up one last document, the court-certified ownership record. "This," she announced, "confirms the Whitmore Trust as the sole legal owner of the estate, valued at $3 million. Her tone was firm, unshakable. Gasps filled the air again. "Furthermore," she continued, "the Reeds Company was dissolved 6 months ago. Every signature tied to their name is falsified." The crowd erupted into scattered whispers, the sound of truth colliding with disbelief. Juliana stumbled backward, shaking her head. "You're lying. I have receipts, proof." "Of payments to actors," Elise interrupted, "all filed through your private account." I watched her crumble with quiet composure. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It spoke fluently through paper and ink. Daniel looked at me with wide eyes, realization dawning. The mansion he'd admired, the life he'd built, had all been founded on stolen soil, and now that foundation was gone. Daniel stood frozen amid the chaos, the woman he loved reduced to fragments of illusion. Juliana reached for him, desperate. "Please, Daniel, I can fix this. I'll explain." He stepped back, eyes wet but firm. "You lied to everyone," he said softly. "Even me." She shook her head, mascara streaking. "I did it for us. You wanted better. I just gave it to you." His expression hardened. "Not like this." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence between them stretched wide, final. The officiant who had performed the ceremony earlier quietly left through the side door, as if the marriage itself had dissolved in air. Guests began to disperse, murmuring apologies to no one in particular. Juliana fell into a chair, staring at the floor, her gown crumpled, her reflection broken in the polished tiles. Daniel turned toward me. Our eyes met. He didn't need to speak. Some endings write themselves. A week later, the mansion stood empty, the air inside carrying only echoes of what had been. Elise managed the transition swiftly, filing claims and notifying authorities. "The trust reverts to your name," she said, handing me the final papers. "You can decide what happens next." I drove to the estate once more. Without the crowd, it felt smaller, less like a palace, more like an apology. I walked through the marble halls, past portraits of strangers Juliana had commissioned to look like ancestors. Dust was already settling where chandeliers once glimmered. On the balcony, the ocean stretched calm and endless. Margaret had loved this view. I placed my hand on the railing and whispered, "It's yours again." The wind moved through the curtains, soft and forgiving. Ownership, I realized, wasn't about possession. It was about truth finding its rightful place. And now it had. The headlines came days later. Bride's family exposed as paid actors. Whitmore land scandal unfolds. Reporters called. I declined every interview. I didn't need to defend myself. The evidence had already done it. Daniel stopped by one evening, quiet, humbled. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." I nodded. "You were blind in love. We've all been there." He exhaled, tears forming. "What happens now?" I looked out toward the ocean, the sun setting over the reclaimed land. "Now we rebuild. Not houses. Character." He smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, I saw my son, not the man trying to prove himself, but the boy who once believed in decency. Elise called later that night. "Congratulations," she said. "You won." I shook my head. "No," I replied softly. "I just stopped losing." Victory didn't roar. It whispered through calm waves, reminding me that dignity makes no noise, but it lasts. By sunrise, the story had already traveled farther than the tide. Every local outlet ran the same headline: Bride's family exposed as paid actors. $3 million estate fraud uncovered at wedding. My phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, acquaintances, even old friends who'd once doubted me. "Henry, is it true?" they asked. I didn't bother responding. Truth didn't need repetition. It just needed daylight. I sat at my desk, coffee cooling beside me, watching the morning light pour across the deed still resting there. It wasn't pride that filled me. It was quiet relief. Margaret's land, her name, her legacy, had spoken louder than any revenge ever could. Daniel texted around noon. "People are talking. They're calling her the fake heiress." I stared at the message for a while before replying. People always talk. Let them learn. By afternoon, even national outlets had picked up the story. What began as gossip became testimony. Proof that truth, once unearthed, doesn't whisper, it rings. Within 48 hours, Juliana's name appeared in the legal section of every major paper. Charges filed for property fraud, false representation, and identity fabrication, the report said. Elise called me early that morning. "She's cooperating," she explained. "The agency that hired the actors confirmed payment receipts. The case is airtight." I nodded slowly. "She'll serve time?" "Most likely probation and restitution," Elise replied. "But socially, she's already sentenced." I thought of the woman who once smiled beneath chandeliers, certain the world would always applaud her. Now her name was currency for ridicule. Still, a part of me felt no triumph. She had built her world on lies, yes, but she had also been a victim of her own emptiness. Elise's tone softened. "You did what was right, Henry." "No," I said quietly. "The truth did." Justice, I realized, doesn't destroy. It reveals. And what it revealed about Juliana wasn't evil. It was emptiness, dressed as ambition. When officials arrived at the estate, I joined Elise to supervise. The mansion stood hollow, stripped of glamour. Inspectors combed through rooms, documenting every fraudulent fixture, rented furniture, unpaid vendors, falsified invoices. She turned deception into decor, one officer muttered. Elise handed him the original trust documents. This is where it begins and ends. He nodded, impressed. Remarkable work, Mr. Whitmore. Most people would have walked away. I smiled faintly. I tried that once. It didn't suit me. As we walked through the echoing halls, I noticed Margaret's initials carved discreetly into a stone near the terrace. I'd forgotten she'd done that years ago. The investigator took one final photograph. Property will revert within the month, he said. Outside, the wind off the ocean carried the smell of salt and justice. The lies had crumbled, but the land remained, strong, patient, and honest, just like the woman who once walked it barefoot. That evening, the sound came, firm, measured knocks against the iron gate. The officers arrived quietly, their cars without sirens. Juliana stepped outside, pale and shaking, still wearing the same clothes from the wedding. "Is this necessary?" she asked weakly. "Yes, ma'am," one officer replied. "We have a warrant for questioning regarding fraudulent property acquisition." Cameras flashed from a distance. Reporters had already gathered near the fence. I watched from the porch, saying nothing. She glanced at me once. No anger, no hatred, only resignation. "I'm sorry," she mouthed before turning away. I nodded, not in forgiveness, but acknowledgement. The gate closed behind her with a slow, metallic groan. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in wearing patience. When the police car disappeared down the coastal road, I looked toward the horizon. The ocean moved as it always did. Calm, indifferent, eternal. Margaret would have approved. By the weekend, everyone in town knew the story. At the coffee shop, people whispered but smiled when I entered. "Good for you, Henry," the barista said. "About time someone stood up to that kind of arrogance." Across the counter, a woman from the recovery center nodded. "You taught us more than meetings ever could." I realized then that the story wasn't just about wealth or deceit, it was about dignity. People needed to see that quiet strength still mattered in a world addicted to noise. Elise called later, laughing softly. "You've gone viral, Henry. They're calling you the Gentleman Avenger." I shook my head, smiling. I'm just someone who stopped apologizing for existing. That night, I took a walk along the shoreline. The tide whispered against the sand, steady and familiar. Justice had its audience, but peace had its own, and I finally belonged to the second one. The first light of morning crept through my kitchen window, tinting the air gold. I heard a soft knock before the clock struck 6. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, unshaven, exhausted, his tie still half undone. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. I nodded toward the chair. "Coffee?" He nodded back, voice trembling. "Please." We sat across from each other, steam rising between us like fog on the ocean. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, earned. Finally, Daniel broke it. "I didn't see it, Dad. I didn't want to." His eyes were red, guilt carved deep into them. "You warned me. Everyone did. But I needed to believe in her." I stirred my coffee slowly. "We all believe in something, son. Sometimes it's the wrong person. Sometimes it's the right lesson." He let out a shaky breath. The sun touched his face, and for the first time in months, I saw the boy he used to be, lost, but finding his way home. Daniel stared at his cup, fingers tightening around it. "I wanted her to love me the way Mom loved you," he said. The words cracked in the air, fragile as glass. But I see now, it wasn't love. It was approval I was chasing. I leaned back, letting the truth settle. "You don't need to chase what you already have," I said softly. His eyes lifted, uncertain. "Do I?" I smiled faintly. "You're my son." That never stopped being true. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I was ashamed of you once. I thought your past made me look small." "And now?" I asked. "Now," he whispered. "I see it made you strong." I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "Strength isn't inherited," I said. "It's learned in the fall." For the first time since the wedding, Daniel smiled. Not an apology, but in understanding. Outside, the world was quiet again. We sat by the window as the morning widened. "Dad," Daniel said, "I keep thinking about everything that happened, how something built on lies can look so perfect until you touch it." I nodded. "Truth has patience, son. It doesn't shout. It waits until it's needed." He stared out at the sea. "Juliana said once that appearances are everything." And she was right, I replied. "Appearances are everything, to those who have nothing real left." He looked back at me, a faint smile forming. "You always sound like Mom when you say things like that." I laughed quietly. She taught me that truth doesn't protect your image, it protects your soul. The waves outside rolled against the shore, rhythmic and eternal. Daniel whispered, "I think I finally understand what you mean." "Good," I said. "Then don't let this lesson fade when the noise does." He nodded, his face calm. Truth had found him at last. When the clock hit 7, Daniel stood. "There's something I need to say," he began. His voice shook but didn't falter. "I'm sorry for doubting you, for letting her treat you that way. I thought staying silent would keep the peace. I was wrong." I listened quietly. "Silence can build peace," I said, "but only when it's used with purpose, not fear." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." I walked to the window, the golden key glinting on the sill. "You can't change what's done," I told him, "but you can choose what kind of man you'll be after." He took a step closer. "Then I'll start with honesty." His voice cracked on the word. I turned back, meeting his eyes. "That's a good start," I said. "Mom would be proud." The light filled the room then, soft and forgiving. Regret had entered quietly, but it left the same way, without noise, without bitterness, just truth. Daniel hesitated before moving closer. Then, without words, he reached for me. The embrace was clumsy at first, years of distance pressing between us, but then it deepened, steady and real. His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered again. "I should have stood up for you." I held him tighter. "You just did." For a long time we stayed that way, two men bound not by pride or anger, but by forgiveness. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant cry of gulls outside. When we finally stepped apart, his eyes were clearer, his voice steadier. "What now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we build something honest." He smiled, wiping his eyes. "Together?" "Together." As he left for work, I stood by the door, watching the sun rise fully over the ocean. It painted everything in gold, the land, the house, and the second chance we'd just begun. Weeks passed, and life found rhythm again. The Whitmore Recovery Foundation began receiving more calls than ever. "Your story inspired people," Elise said during a board meeting. "Donations have doubled." I looked around the office. Bright walls, framed photos of clients who'd rebuilt their lives. "It's not my story," I said. "It's Margaret's. She believed broken things could still serve purpose." The new wing under construction would bear her name. Daniel had joined as a volunteer, helping with outreach. Watching him hand coffee to newcomers, I saw the humility that once escaped him, now shaping into quiet leadership. Recovery, I thought, wasn't just for addiction. It was for arrogance, too. The team prepared a report for the annual conference, projecting future growth. I signed the final page, pausing over my wife's initials embossed on the letterhead. The foundation had started as my penance. Every morning brought new messages, some from old friends, others from complete strangers. "You don't know me," one voicemail began, "but your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic marriage." Another said, "My father watched your speech online. He cried. He hasn't spoken to me in years, but today he called." I listened quietly, each voice a reminder that dignity was contagious. The scandal that once humiliated me had turned into something unplanned, hope. One man wrote, "You showed us that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be just." I saved that message. People didn't need heroes. They needed proof that endurance still worked. Elise laughed when I told her. "You've become a symbol," she said. I smiled. "I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to stop being a shadow." She nodded. Well, you did both. Some victories don't roar, they ripple, quietly changing the tide. The first email came from a local journalist. The second came from a national network. "We'd like to interview you about the wedding scandal," they said. I ignored the first few, but Elise convinced me. "Tell your side before others do," she urged. So I agreed, on one condition. "No gossip, no drama," I said. "Just truth." When the cameras arrived at the foundation, I stood beside the plaque bearing Margaret's name. The reporter smiled politely. "Mr. Whitmore, people are calling your story a modern parable. How do you feel about that?" I thought for a moment. "Parables end with lessons," I replied. "I'm still living mine." She asked if I'd forgiven Juliana. I hesitated. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give the guilty," I said. "It's peace you give yourself." The interview aired that weekend. By Monday, letters poured in. The world didn't celebrate my revenge. It respected my restraint. Pastor Mark called one evening, his voice warm with memory. "Henry, I watched your interview. The congregation did too." I smiled. "Hope I didn't bore them." He chuckled. "Quite the opposite. You reminded people what grace looks like when it grows from truth." I paused, thinking of Margaret's faith, quiet, steady, unshakable. "I didn't plan for any of this," I said. "That's the thing about grace," he replied. "You don't plan it, you just recognize it when it visits." He invited me to speak at Sunday service. "About dignity," he said. "It's what your story's really about." I agreed. That night, I sat by the window, writing notes on an old envelope. Words came easily, not from pride, but from clarity. The storm had passed, but its rain had watered something worth keeping. I whispered, "Thank you, Margaret." The ocean wind carried her answer back through the open glass, soft, like a prayer returned. The church was full that Sunday. Neighbors, colleagues, even a few faces from the wedding I hadn't expected. I stepped to the podium, the sunlight spilling across the pews. "Dignity," I began, "isn't inherited. It's rebuilt every time you're tested." The room fell silent. People think strength is about volume, but I've learned that the quietest voice, the one that refuses to curse or shout, can change the world faster than anger ever could. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. I told them about silence, about patience, about letting truth do the speaking. "When someone calls you no one," I said, "remember, the soil still remembers your name." Applause rose softly, reverently. As I stepped down, Daniel hugged me, whispering, "She'd be proud." Outside, the ocean wind carried the sound of gulls and waves. For once I didn't feel small, I felt steady. It was a late afternoon when Daniel stopped by again, carrying a small box under his arm. "Brought something for you," he said. We sat on the porch overlooking the water, the sky painted in copper and blue. He opened the box and pulled out an old family photo. Margaret, him, and me on the front lawn of our first house. The corners were frayed, but the smiles were intact. "Found it when we were cleaning out the storage unit," he said. "Figured it belongs here." I looked at the photo, tracing the faded edges. "You were 6, I said. "Mom had burned the toast that morning." He laughed softly. "You still ate it." "It was her toast," I said. Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like memory exhaling. He leaned back, eyes on the horizon. "I don't want to lose this again," he said. I nodded. "Then hold on differently this time." The waves rolled quietly below, steady as forgiveness. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in uneven handwriting. Inside, a single page. "Mr. Whitmore," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I've started working with a legal aid group for women in recovery. Maybe it's a start." I read it twice before folding it back into the envelope. There was no bitterness in her words, only exhaustion, and maybe a hint of awakening. I set the letter beside Margaret's photo and whispered, "Good." Not because she deserved peace, but because peace deserved her. People like Juliana often fall chasing power, but sometimes the fall teaches them the gravity of grace. I didn't plan to write back. Some stories don't need epilogues. They just need closure that breathes quietly, like the tide reclaiming the shore without asking for permission. That evening, I walked along the coast, the horizon glowing orange and violet. The ocean had always been my mirror. It reflected everything I refused to say aloud. I thought of the mansion, now silent, of Daniel rebuilding, of Juliana learning what truth costs. The tide moved in rhythm with my steps, pulling the sand, erasing footprints I'd left minutes before. I realized life wasn't about permanence. It was about impact. Margaret used to say, "Every wave forgets where it started, but it still shapes the shore." I finally understood. The pain, the humiliation, the quiet revenge, it had all carved something better into me. Dignity wasn't about keeping the past spotless. It was about walking through it without fear of what it left behind. As the sun sank lower, I whispered, "Thank you for the storm." Because without it, I'd never have learned how peace sounds when it returns. Night came slow and soft. The ocean wind brushed against my face, carrying salt and something gentler, memory. I sat by the old railing of Margaret's land, the same spot where we'd once stood planning the future. The house lights flickered behind me, but I kept my eyes on the horizon. The waves moved endlessly, patient as time itself. I could almost hear her laughter in the wind, faint but clear. It wasn't haunting, it was guiding. The world had seen its spectacle, its fall, its justice. But this moment belonged only to silence. "We did it," I murmured. "They remember our name again." A gull passed overhead, its wings cutting across the moonlight. Somewhere behind me, the golden key hung near the door, gleaming under the porch light, a symbol of something reclaimed, not won. I exhaled slowly, letting the wind carry the last trace of anger away into the dark. The story began with a name erased, and it ended with one remembered. People still spoke about the wedding, the land, the scandal, but when they mentioned me now, it wasn't with pity, it was with quiet respect. "That man," they'd say, "he never raised his voice, but the truth did it for him." Daniel often joked, "Dad, you're finally someone." I'd smile, knowing the irony. Being someone was never about recognition. It was about peace in your own reflection. The waves continued their eternal applause, soft and steady. As I locked the door that night, the golden key shimmered like a promise fulfilled. Margaret's photo hung by the entryway, her smile calm, timeless. I turned off the lights, the sound of the ocean filling the room like a heartbeat. They once called me no one, but in the end, silence had rewritten the story, and the voice they ignored became the one they remembered.